Thank you for listening to Dialogues on Democracy, celebrating IFES's 25th anniversary. I'm Laura Osio. Following the extremely close presidential race that took place in Mexico in 2006, and the stories of grim violence resulting from the drug war being fought in the country, all eyes were on Mexico during the presidential and parliamentary elections held on July 1st. In this podcast, IFES President and CEO Bill Sweeney shares his thoughts on the poll. He also tells us how election management bodies such as Mexico's Instituto Federal Electoral can collaborate with their counterparts around the world to improve the electoral process so that citizens' voices are heard through their ballots. You have observed many elections around the world. What was your overall impression of the Mexican elections?
Mexican election of 2012 was very well prepared for. People followed the regulations, so lists were posted. All of the voting material was in place. It was well staffed, both by volunteers and election workers. IFE had an enormous challenge in trying to administer over 144,000 polling stations across the country, and they seemed to do it quite well.
Mexico is fighting a notorious drug war. How was security on Election Day?
Election Day was very peaceful and calm. The Mexican police and military were fully deployed to protect the integrity of the election process and the voters, and frankly, the drug cartel is not going to engage in criminal activities or violent activities when all the police and military are deployed in full sight. So Mexico enjoyed a very peaceful election day.
On Election Day, you mentioned on Twitter that some voters were not able to cast their ballots in polling stations. What regulation prohibited them from doing so, and what was its purpose?
Under Mexican election law, a polling station is limited to about 750 ballots. Under Mexican election law, they had in Mexico City 5 polling stations for Mexicans who were not registered as residents of Mexico City but happened to be in Mexico City on Election Day. All 5 of those stations were witnessed by the International Observing Team. All 5 of those stations were overwhelmed. Literally thousands of people who were registered to vote, who were in their home country's capital but could not vote on Election Day. And it was a matter of some concern that either more polling stations should have been set up if there was the ballot restriction per polling station, and there was clearly space to do that, or there should have been more of these special stations organized. We do not know until we see the reports from observers in other cities as to whether or not this was a unique problem to Mexico City or was a flaw in the Mexican election process.
It is widely known that the general elections that took place in the year 2000 were the first ones that truly reflected the will of the Mexican voters. How has Mexico's democracy evolved since then?
Well, what you've seen now is that in 2000, Mexico changed leadership for the first time with the election of President Fox. They then, in 2006, chose to keep the PAN, the party of President Fox, in power in a very, very close contested election. And PRI, the party that had ruled Mexico for better than 60 years, actually placed in third. Now in 2012, the PRI has won election and says it's a new and different PRI than the one that existed 12 years or for generations before, and that will be the test. However, it's important to note, you've now got a country which was under one-party rule for most of the 20th century. It has now been through, in the last 3 elections, they have made decisions that reflect an informed and democratic electorate.
The Mexican Election Commission, the IFE, works with international NGOs such as IFES and other election management bodies around the world. Please tell us about these collaborations and how they help citizens around the world have a say in the way they are governed.
IFE has been an outstanding member of the international community. They have opened their doors to training and building capacity for other election management bodies. They have been willing to share their best practices. They have been willing to absorb and integrate into the Mexican political system innovations and best practices from other systems around the world. It's making the election process better for everyone, and it's one of the responsibilities of the public servants who manage the election process in their own countries or parts of their countries to constantly strive to deliver better results, a better process, more transparent process to the citizens of their countries. And IFE is really one of the leaders in this field.
Based on your vast experience in this field, what can the international community do to help countries with developing democracies?
They can, first of all, invest the time, energy, effort to work with the election commissions and members of parliament in the pre-election stage so as to make the election law and regulation that much more effective, transparent, and reflective of best practices in this very fast-changing business. Secondly, they can hold them to the high international standards when their job is to run the election. And what we saw in Mexico and what we're seeing in and more countries is that the presence of international observers or witnesses following a regime of observing the election in accord with the UN principles results in a higher standard of care being given to the election process and thus a more transparent and more professional delivery of the service called the election to the voter in each of these countries.
For more dialogues on democracy, please visit ifes.org.